next topic. You sat here.
Flip classroom.
All right, so Laura gave us a little intro to it. What do you think, Carter?
It's interesting.
Definitely.
I have a question. For those of you that are teaching in the classroom, do you use Canvas for your grades right now?
Yes.
So in a way, you're already starting that segue, moving into the online environment while you're in the classroom. I, for the first semester, have been using Canvas to do my in-classroom grades, and my students were ready for it. You know, they've all taken online classes, many of them under Blackboard, and prefer the Blackboard environment to the Canvas environment, but I just think it's because they don't know it yet. I really like Canvas, so it's a new thing, and I'm willing to move into the flipped idea. I think it's great. We used to call them, at another university I was with, we used to call them hybrid classes, where students had to do part of their classroom learning in the environment, and then they would meet in the classroom for the other half of the class. Like you mentioned earlier, they would do the hands-on things. That way it worked out very well.
I'd have a little bit of trouble going all the way to that idea in a science class, because I can't imagine not lecturing at all. You know, having all my lecture material just posted for them to read.
Are you thinking they would do it?
I'm thinking they wouldn't do it. I'm thinking they would get bogged down in a lot of the terminology, because I guess I'd have to super expand my current lectures if I were to post them, because as I lecture, one of the things I do is define words, and expecting them to go off and look them all up as they're reading probably isn't, reasonable. So I can't imagine them picking up enough material on their own with lectures just posted. But having said that, I'm using Canvas for the first time as well, and I've been trying to, kind of be a little bit more with the times and do things in both places. And one of the things I've been doing is creating lots of little quizzes, and I do them some in class too, but just as a way to keep reinforcing material. And I know I have some students that have really been looking forward to them, and in the day or two leading up to an exam, they'll take them all. However many I've posted for that unit, they'll take them all as a study tool. I'm like, that's super, what a great idea. So I've been trying to give them more options for teaching themselves in that, just more little bite size. But yes, sticking the toe in. And I do try to make time though to, I don't just lecture, and we do activities as well, but I can't imagine not lecturing that.
What if it was videotape? They would watch videotape.
Well, Denise, isn't this what you do?
It is. It's what I started doing. I researched it well before I even jumped in. There's some, it's really interesting because you're going to see a lot of conversation that is emerging in in higher ed. But secondary ed and elementary, from K through 12, they're starting to use more of this inverted or flipped approach. And part of it is I think what drives it there is because some of these classes only meet for 42 minutes, right? So when you're thinking about your students, they're coming from classes that meant 42 minutes, maybe. And if they didn't have an assembly that day, or they didn't have tons of announcements or what have you, and so they're managing that. So they're trying to find ways where, like Laura was saying, the passive content, right, is available to students 24/7. And they come in, and then whatever assignment or project or practice or lab work that needs to be done, where they really need you there, right? When you think about it, when they're doing their homework, or they're writing a concept, about a concept, or they're trying to make an argument or something like that, in essence, if they try to do that at home away from you, you're not necessarily available. But when you're there, and they're actually doing the application, the applied work, you're available to help kind of go But, so to go back into, so what they were talking about videos and how do you manage that content, right, with passive material. A series of small videos, and they say that when they're younger learners, that the videos should be shorter, 5 to 7 minutes. I'm like, holy moly, there's no way I can, and really one concept at a time. I mean, some of the big criticism of higher ed, and particularly, is that we try to cram way too much learning in. If we're trying to get at learning, the lecture method has some limitations, right? If we're trying to cover the material, then we can simply, that's usually what folks talk about is, I've got to cover all that material. So I'm like, well, what good is that if there's no learning happening while you're covering the material? So those are some of the philosophical questions that get asked in that instance. And so I think every instructor, every professor has to ask him or herself to what is that question. They have to answer on their own terms. But one of the things that I've done is I've taken some of, I've really kind of sorted through and sifted through and said yes, yes, no, no, no to some of the concepts and really tried to let the SLOs sort of drive how I'm working, what concepts I'm working with, rather than the other way around. And so in that sense, I'm able to then kind of eliminate some of these things that I think are so important that I have to cover them, because if they don't know them, their lives are going to end when they leave my class. And that's just not true. And so it does take that kind of willingness to go in and edit down some of the content. And so what I've done is I've kind of produced, if you will, screencasts of my lecture notes, in a sense, where they're hearing my voice as they would hear it in lecture. They would see that. Now the slides are like so dull. I mean, they're really kind of dull, but they were dull to begin with. I don't know that they were any more exciting in person than in this video, to be honest with you. But one of the things that I've set, a goal that I've created for myself, is to go in and work on the production value end of those. And I tell students, I'm like, yeah, there's 4 parts or there's 3 parts to this, and each one's important. And the other piece that's important that you're getting at is that some people want to call it accountability piece, and other people want to say that it's maybe a kind of a learning, how you kind of help them to learn the material, sort of quizzing, low stakes quizzing, and making sure they coming in and having them do many points, or even as a group write in class, of course this would take class time, as a group write a summary paper of, give each group a different concept that was covered in the lecture material that was posted online. To do that, right, so that way. So that's that, again, that reinforcement. So they get it first through a lecture video, they get it second through quizzing, and then they get it again through doing the conceptual, those little mini papers or whatever, conceptually. And then you reinforce it in class that way. But it's one of those things where, before I built in the quizzes, because students respond, right? It's sort of like, students will respond to 2 things. They'll respond to tests and quizzes because they're so they're so encultured to it. And so I'll have students freak out about a test that's worth 50 points out of 1,000 points in a class, and they're like, the test. And they'll work. I said, folks, it's really more like a big quiz. How does that help you? And they're like, it's a test. Right, and so there is a way to kind of use that nervous energy, if you will, and have them turn it in and motivate for themselves, and use the quizzing, using online quizzing tools.
I guess another point I would have to make too is, and I suppose you just have to be very, very flexible, maybe semester to semester, because every classroom's dynamic is so different. I have 2 classes right now. One, I could have probably 6 slides for the whole lecture period and just barely get through them because they're chatting, they're asking about stuff, so what if, and so how come, and cool, But then I have this other class who I will purposefully stop and say, so why do you think that is? Nothing, 0 response. I have one student that's very apt and will usually respond when I'm trying to, how about over here? You quiet, and nothing, I get blank faces from them all. And I've tried doing activities, and it's just very sluggish. It's like dragging them along. So some classrooms will do it willingly, and some just won't.
They're more work. More challenge.
I used Canvas for the first time in all my classes this semester, and I had done it with developmental last semester. So I'm still working my way through Canvas and how to use it and best how to use it. And from the student perspective, I will post things into the modules, and I will send little announcements and emails and tell them, don't forget to look at your module, because it's still this mentality, I'm not taking an online course, miss, so why are you putting it on there? If I wanted to see all the stuff online, I would take an online course, and I keep hearing that from students. And so I've been really cautious about how much of the stuff I'm putting on there. And so I did like kind of a little trial where we talked about thesis statements and creating thesis statements. And we did an in-class activity with one paper, and it was a success. Everyone who came to the board and we worked on their thesis statement left with a good thesis statement. The next paper, I didn't do it in class. We did it online, and it was failure all the way around. And it was just like they were looking for me to give them the answer. So it's been definitely a challenge, I think, because so many instructors are very new to Canvas still, or this first time getting in there. Just trying to figure out how to use Canvas and what's the limit for your class and what's too much. And I mean, I put in a nice little packet about how to write about advertising, and I put so much effort into finding the right one to put up there, and I'm like, so I know you all read your advertising packets, let's discuss it. And I'm like, huh? Oh yeah, I forgot to read that. And like, did anybody print it out? No. So I'm like, well, okay, so I'm just going to give you a lecture on it then and cover what you should have already read, and I wasn't planning spending that class time that way, but I had to because they didn't come prepared like they were supposed to. Even when I sent a reminder out to read it. So, it's a challenge.
Just to add one last thing, there's just one thing that I found really successful in Canvas so far, and of course it's only the students that really want to do this, but some of them love to chat to you. They love to ask you questions through Canvas, and so that's just one thing I've tried to do is just be check into it often enough that I can be very quick with responses and make at least those students that are interested in that kind of interaction feel like, I'm chatting with them all during the week, even though I'm not seeing them.
Right.
I think that I went to a flipping classroom session at this distance ed conference, and it was, the presenters were from Texas A&M, and they have this whole little department that will help professors develop a flipped classroom. And they did reiterate that the idea of very short videos, because they'll glaze over at those just like they would in your lecture, and they teach them techniques of how to be a little bit more enthusiastic when they're videotaping the lectures, because some professors tend to be very dry and boring. And so, I don't know, I'm pretty much...
Nobody is this.
I mean, but I am, when I'm just standing up there lecturing, I'm boring. I know that because I see students glaze over, right? And so, to me, it's been a lot more fun, and we've kind of done this in the library anyway. I didn't realize it until I went to this session, but in English 1301, they have 2 library sessions, basically. The first one's online, it's just an online module, so that's the flipped part of it. And then when they come to class, we're actually doing more active research, so that while we're in the classroom with them, if they have trouble, once they actually try to implement the stuff that they got a little taste of online, then they have trouble with it, we're right there, and we can go around and, okay, so this is how you do this, simple things like that. So I I don't know, I'm a big proponent of this now, because it's a lot more fun than standing up there and lecturing.
I have a question about this. Is it possible that we could develop our own kind of MOOC or flipped classroom?
You mean
Is
like
this
best
something-
practices
Do
type
you
of
like the best
thing, or-
practice? There's something called the, I was gonna say that would be really cool. There's something called the Flipped Learning Network. And if you're interested, they've got, it's called, the URL is flippedclassroom.org. And they do have discussion groups that you can sign up for. And one of the discussions that I signed up for was, flipping in higher ed kind of thing. Can you flip a higher ed class? And I would, and it's been really kind of fruitful, just kind of being part of that dialogue and reading some of those. I think that the shorter the videos, they're short but concentrated, or they go deeper into that concept or what have you. It's amazing, if you time yourself 5 to 7 minutes, you can probably go much, much deeper. I think as a student gets older, right, they've developed a patience to go through maybe a 10, 12-minute video. I mean, they could actually do that. And I tell these students, some of these are, pushing the 10 or 15-minute window. And I said, so be warned. But, there are cool ways, like, when I create the quizzes, there's some pieces of the lecture or, the video that's, if they watch the first 2 minutes, they're not going to be able to answer the quiz, right? Questions and things like that. So it's a motivator as well. So using that kind of nervous energy they have about assessment or being assessed is a kind of motivator for them to be able to do that.
What was the name of that again?
It's flipped here. Let me write it down here.
The other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about students trying to learn definitions, it made me think of the soft chalk software that we all have access to, where you can create interactive lessons or just activities. And one of the things you can create is a crossword puzzle. So you can kind of warn your, they bone up on the definitions, and then, in class, you could use the crossword puzzle as a jumping off point for more in-depth explanation of, what this really means.
Oh, yeah, I've used crossword puzzles a few times. It really, especially the younger students, really seem to love them. I've done an immunity crossword puzzle, I've done a meiosis, mitosis crossword puzzle. Everybody's favorite topic.
And you know what, the other thing too is that sometimes, we do a small unit on the resume as persuasive communication. And I could lecture on resumes. Can you think of anything more than that? And I've done it. This is how I know, and I've done it. And so I went on YouTube and I searched resumes. And I have to admit, it took me a little while, but I finally have found 2 or 3 of them that are so powerful and dynamic. And from somebody else who it is their kind of job, right, to master these kinds of things, covering all the things. And so here they have an outside expert that I can introduce without having to go through DPS to find them a parking cone, get a parking cone, or pass or anything like that. So there's a different voice that's covering the same material. So there's some materials that are already out there. You should probably find a really cool animation on, there's really neat stuff in them. There's really wonderful Web 2.0 applications that are available for putting together some interesting kinds of things. I think it takes a little while to get there. One of the reasons I flipped my classroom is because of JECO liaison responsibilities, because I knew I was going to be, and that was one of my primary motivators. I'm so glad that I did it. I did it for other reasons, but here I found, I'm like, wow, this is really kind of neat. And when students miss class, and that lecture material is available to them 24/7, they can go back to it. So those are some of the benefits that I found, right? And they're like, I miss anything important? Yes, always.
No, there's no reason to be here.
I was looking at the Canvas network, because this one is just canvas.net. And they have a lot of professional development type moves. They don't have one on that, but that would be a good one to build. But in scrolling through here, I found some that deal with some of the topics that we were talking about, like English composition, basic math, those types of things that we're talking about is what happens if you don't place into a certain course, what really happens to you. And so MOOCs can respond to in that way because they're free, they're open, and they're available at no cost to anyone. Of course, you have to have the motivation.
I guess I like what Laura was saying about at A&M, they had this system in place to help you if you wanted to try this. You know, it's kind of like giving you some rails. Okay, I'm on a good path here. I feel like and someone's saying, yeah, this is what you should do, or no, I don't really think that's going to be very effective. So that you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm happy to help anybody. That would be fun. I've never.
Yeah, would you too?
She's looking at me. I'd be happy to help.
Giving you another project.
Yeah, that would be fun. Actually, that would be
Now that
fun.
you've given up your
There.
DECA responsibilities.
I know. I'll always I'll just create one. During the summer, that'll be fun.
I'm not up on the, are we trying to get an part-time instructional designer for the Innovation Center?
We are.
Okay,
We're,
so we may actually.
we're looking to hire a part-time instructional designer to work for the IIC. So that person would help with things like that.
Okay.
So I was asking you, how about if we videotaped you? You know, if you videotaped your lectures this semester, then you could use those